They were never supposed to be found. Not the letters, not the names, not the blood-soaked habit buried behind the altar. Section 1. For over 160 years, the Catholic Diocese of Wisconsin has denied the whispers, called them superstition, local madness, Protestant hysteria. But you're not here for the official story, are you? You're here for what they buried. In the walls, in the records, and in the woods behind St. Mary's Convent. 23 nuns vanished between 1854 and 1862, and no one outside that stone sanctuary was ever supposed to ask why. But someone did. In 2023, during a restoration project funded by a historical preservation grant, a sealed cavity behind the convent's old sacristy was opened. Inside, they found them. 6 letters wrapped in oilcloth, stained with mildew, and a name carved into wood backwards, like it was meant to be read from the other side. That name? Agnes O'Connor, the first to go, but not the first to scream. What you're about to hear isn't fiction. It isn't faith. It's a descent into a place where holiness was used as a mask, obedience was weaponized, and purity was demanded at a cost even the devil would find excessive. This isn't just a story of missing nuns. This is the anatomy of control, religious, psychological, and spiritual. A model of manipulation perfected behind chapel doors, then exported to schools, hospitals, and homes across America. A test case for obedience through fear. And it worked for decades. They called it sacrifice. They called it virtue. But beneath the white veils and wooden pews, a different scripture was being written, in silence, in shadows, and sometimes, in screams that no one outside those stone walls would ever hear. You were never meant to hear this story. But now that you have, you don't get to look away. Don't move. Don't blink. And whatever you do, don't pray. Not until you've heard what they did in the name of God. This is just the beginning. Section 2. Started, as these things often do, with obedience. Not the kind you give willingly, the kind beaten into the soul under the banner of salvation. At St. Mary's, obedience wasn't a virtue. It was a weapon, and Mother Superior Catherine Murphy wielded it with surgical precision. In 1854, when the convent was founded, she was hailed as a pillar of piety, a woman of unshakable faith. But those who truly looked saw something else behind her pale blue eyes. Not madness, not cruelty, something colder, something calculated. Her eyes didn't judge. They measured. Every corridor at St. Mary's was built to enforce silence. Narrow halls, stone walls that echoed your every breath. No mirrors, no clocks, just bells, 7 times a day, telling you when to rise, when to kneel, when to eat, when to pray, and when to confess. But confession here wasn't for sins. It was for secrets, your dreams, your memories of home, of men, of warmth. You were to empty yourself wholly and completely. That was the rule. The young nuns, most barely out of girlhood, arrived from Ireland thinking they were entering a house of healing, a refuge, a holy order. What they entered instead was a machine, one designed to erase them from the inside out. Sister Agnes O'Connor, 23, radiant, soft-spoken, was the first to notice something wrong. Her journal, preserved in a water-damaged trunk under the chapel stairs, paints a picture that grows darker with every page. She wrote of nightly inspections, of being awakened by the sound of steps just beyond her curtain, of a cold hand brushing her cheek in the dark, not in comfort, but in control. She wrote of Mother Catherine's eyes always watching, and of Sister Margaret's tinctures, which made her dizzy after meals she could barely stomach. One entry ends abruptly, mid-sentence. I think I saw something through the keyhole last night. I thought it was. But no, it couldn't have been. Her mouth was. That was the last thing she ever wrote. 2 days later, she vanished. No goodbyes, no explanation, just an empty bed, and a rosary left coiled like a serpent on her pillow. The official record? Transferred to missionary work in Minnesota. But there's no record of her ever arriving. No train manifest, no parish registry, no grave. You see, obedience wasn't requested at St. Mary's. It was extracted piece by piece, until what remained was no longer a woman. It was a vessel, ready for what came next. Section 3. It was never just about faith. It was about power. By spring of 1855, the mood inside St. Mary's had shifted, subtly at first. Less singing in the chapel, eyes averted during meals. Laughter, once heard in the garden during recreation hour, faded like color draining from a painting. Silence wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced. Sister Bernarde Walsh was the second to vanish. A voice like an angel, they said. She had sung the Gloria during their first Easter Mass, her notes floating through the stone walls like incense. The orphans adored her. The sisters leaned on her warmth like a hearth in winter. And then gone. Mother Catherine's explanation? Called to assist in Chicago. But no train was seen that morning. No trunk packed. No farewell offered. Her absence echoed deeper than just a missing voice. It punctured the illusion that anything was still sacred here. That's when Sister Mary Collins started writing her own account. Secretly, on scraps of old homilies and discarded laundry lists. She hid them under floorboards in hollowed hymnals, in the base of a cracked statue of St. Clare. She knew. She saw what the others refused to see. That the disappearances weren't random. They were deliberate and targeted. The kind, the beautiful, the emotionally sensitive, those who inspired affection or drew the orphan's trust, vanished first. While the cold, the compliant, the unquestioning remained. And the infirmary, it became a place of whispers. Sister Margaret, with her quiet authority and knowledge of obscure herbs, administered calming tonics to anxious sisters. Tea laced with valerian, laudanum, or worse. Nuns began waking with gaps in memory, bruises they couldn't explain, dreams they described as visions or nightmares, always of water, always of screaming behind stone. One day, Sister Mary found something strange near the garden wall. A child's doll, soaked in what looked like rust. But it was no child's toy. It was stitched with hair, human, and inside, beneath the stuffing, a tooth. She showed it to Sister Teresa, one of the few who still dared speak freely. They buried it behind the hedges, praying they had imagined it. But imagination in a place like this was a liability. Soon, Sister Teresa began questioning openly. The punishments, the silence, the transfers. And just like that, she was next. Her bed was made, her veil gone. A single page from her prayer book remained under her pillow with 7 words scrawled in haste. If I disappear, tell Father Ryan. Twice. You're beginning to see it now, aren't you? They weren't just removing women. They were removing witnesses. Section 4. By the winter of 1856, St. Mary's no longer resembled a convent. It had become a fortress of silence, of shadows, of secrets too dangerous to name. The girls still knelt in the chapel, still sang their hymns, still worked the gardens and washed the linens. But their eyes had changed. Gone was the light of devotion. In its place, fear. The kind of fear that lives beneath the skin. The kind that no amount of prayer can silence. Mother Catherine's authority had morphed into something unholy. A regime cloaked in cassocks. Penances once symbolic became savage. Sisters were forced to fast for days, sleep on stone, flagellate themselves in the name of purity. And those who resisted, they simply ceased to exist. You see, the Vatican had no oversight here. This was frontierland, miles from any bishop with the spine to ask questions. The only law that mattered was the one behind the convent walls. And that law came from her. Sister Clare O'Donnell had broken a minor rule. A piece of chocolate from home, smuggled in through a grateful family. For that, she was forced to kneel for 72 hours, allowed only water and a single crust of bread. On the second night, she collapsed during evening prayers, not from hunger, but from something darker. Witnesses said her body shook violently, her lips frothing, her eyes rolling back. Sister Margaret rushed to her side with a tincture no one recognized. Moments later, Clare awoke, eyes wide, lips silent, a different woman. From that day forward, she obeyed without question. Her voice became monotone, her smile fixed, as if someone had reached inside her soul and twisted the dial to mute. Sister Mary began documenting everything. Every bruise, every disappearance, every flicker of defiance crushed beneath the weight of doctrine. She wrote of late-night processions to the chapel, always led by Mother Catherine, always involving the same 3 women. and always returning with one less. She wrote of a room beneath the chapel, long locked, but recently opened. A room no one spoke of, a room with chains bolted to the floor. She wrote of Sister Elizabeth, once gentle, now complicit. Her hands, once warm, now cold as she offered tea that made you forget what you'd seen. And then came the worst entry. A scream, not human. She wrote, "It sounded like a soul breaking. I do not think that was Sister Clare. I do not think it was anyone God still sees. This is no longer a story of vanished women. This is a system, a ritual, and the cost is the mind." Section 5. They called it the quieting. Not officially, not aloud, but among the few remaining sisters who still remembered the early days, before the shadows stretched too long, before the walls began to hum at night with something other, it became the whispered name for what happened to those who resisted. You didn't die at St. Mary's. You were quieted, erased, piece by sacred piece. Sister Mary Collins recorded everything she could. In hidden pages, in codes sewn into embroidery, in the margins of catechism texts she knew no one would read. She felt the pull, the thick, invisible rope tightening around her own sanity. And yet she persisted, because someone had to remember the names. Sister Agnes, Sister Bernarde, Sister Teresa, Sister Clare, now Sister Josephine. Josephine had always been quiet, obedient, but the night she asked why the chapel cellar had been sealed with a slab of lead, she was gone. No explanation, just the smell of candle wax in the hallway and a spot of crimson on the marble floor where she had last knelt. It wasn't just spiritual control anymore. It was ritualistic, purposeful, surgical. That's when Sister Mary discovered something that chilled her blood. Inside Sister Margaret's apothecary, there was a shelf no one was allowed to touch, marked with Latin phrases she could barely read, words like anima extractum and veritas obscura. She stole one vial when no one was watching, just to taste, just to know. The dreams that followed, they weren't dreams. She saw women, faces she knew, hanging from hooks in the cellar, whispering prayers that turned to curses. She saw blood on altar cloths. She saw Mother Catherine standing before a mirror, speaking words in a language older than Rome, older than Latin, older than God. And the reflection did not speak with her mouth. Sister Mary awoke with scratch marks across her chest, in the shape of a cross turned upside down. That day, at midday meal, she noticed something else. All the bread was marked with a tiny triangle, burnt into the crust. A sigil. She would later find it carved into the underside of the chapel altar. And in the margins of Mother Catherine's private missal, tucked beneath Psalm 88. You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. They weren't just disciplining these women. They were transforming them, rewriting their will, extracting obedience like marrow from bone, until nothing human remained, only silence. Obedient, empty, devout. Warning: if you've made it this far, comment. They tried to silence me below twice. Not for engagement, for identity. So you remember who you were before you heard this. Because from here, the descent gets darker. Section 6. The descent into the undercroft was not allowed. But Sister Mary had run out of options, and time. It was a night with no moon, a cold that pressed against the lungs like stone. She followed the sound again, that faint dragging noise beneath the chapel floor. It wasn't rats. It was too slow, too deliberate. She waited until the midnight bell. While the others slept under blankets of obedience and fear, Mary slipped into the sacristy, heart pounding like the drumbeat of a funeral march. Behind the vestments, where the wall had cracked slightly during the spring thaw, she pried loose the iron grate that had long been nailed shut. The air behind it wasn't air. It was absence. She descended the narrow stairwell with only a taper candle, its flame flickering not from draught, but from presence. Something down there breathed. She felt it. Not air through lungs, but will. Like the room itself was alive, waiting. At the bottom she found it. A chamber, circular, walls lined with mirrors, all shattered, all covered in veils except one. And in the center, an altar, not like any she had seen. It was carved from obsidian, covered in Latin phrases she couldn't translate, and blood that was too fresh to be dry. Around it was 7 candles, arranged in a shape she'd only seen once. In a forbidden book hidden in Father Ryan's personal library. A sigil, not of Christ, not of saints, but of something older, something pre-Christian, something that demanded not belief but obedience through terror. And there were books, bound in leather that didn't feel like any cowhide. Pages that pulsed slightly, not metaphorically, literally. She opened one and read just a phrase. To silence the voice, unroot the soul. Behind her, the mirror still intact began to hum. Not visually, audibly. A low moan, like morning filtered through stone. She turned to see her reflection, but it wasn't hers. The face was burned, lips sewn shut, eyes gone white, not blind but watching. And around its neck, Sister Mary's rosary. She dropped the book. It screamed as it hit the floor. When she ran, the mirror didn't crack. It laughed. The next morning, Sister Mary collapsed during breakfast. Blood trickled from her ears. She couldn't speak, not from fear but because her tongue had gone stiff, as if she had bitten it off. But there was no wound. She spent the next 3 days in the infirmary, silent, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. On the 4th night, she wrote one final note in her hidden journal. They are not praying, they are summoning, and the veil is already torn. She never spoke again, but her writings, they remained, buried behind the statue of the Virgin, in the hem of a funeral robe, inside the binding of a hymnal sung every Sunday by girls who had no idea they were walking through corridors of the damned. Are you starting to understand? St. Mary's wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was ruled by them. Section 7. The nun in the well was real. They all denied it, of course. But you don't dig a second well behind a convent unless the first one is cursed. Locals called it the Weeping Pit. For years, even before the first nun disappeared, farmers in the nearby valley reported hearing cries rising from the earth on windless nights. Low, guttural, feminine, like a woman being drowned over and over again. In the summer of 1855, a groundskeeper named Elias found something strange. He'd been tending the orchard behind the convent, an area forbidden to the sisters, when he noticed a trail of white fabric leading into the tall grass. At the end of the trail, a single slipper, hand-stitched, the heel torn, and beside it, drag marks in the dirt. He followed them to the old well. What he saw down there was enough to make him break his contract with the church and vanish that very night. But not before leaving a single note in the vestry, nailed to the door with a carpenter's spike. She had no eyes, only black, and she sang something I've never heard. Latin, but not of God. The sisters claimed Elias was drunk, delirious, that there was no missing nun. But what they didn't know is that he wasn't the only one who saw. Sister Beatrice, the youngest of the novices, confessed to the priest during Advent that year. Sobbing, shaking, terrified, she had watched from her window as Mother Catherine and 2 other sisters carried a woman, gagged and limp, through the orchard. They lowered her into the old well not with ropes, but chains. She screamed. The next day, Sister Beatrice was found catatonic. Her hair had turned white. She never spoke again. The convent sealed off the orchard, built a new well, told the town that the old one had dried up, even as local children dared one another to run past it and listen. What they heard were hymns, sung in reverse. And here's where the story twists. In 1994, long after the convent had been abandoned, a team of geological surveyors investigated the grounds. Underground anomalies had been reported, strange magnetic pulses near the chapel and surrounding woods. One of them, a junior intern, wandered near the old well. He found the stone lid half buried in moss. He moved it, and beneath it a spiral staircase, one that had never been mapped, never documented. Hand-chiseled, ancient. They descended 2 levels before the air turned unbreathable. On the wall was a carving, a nun in robes, kneeling, arms extended, mouth open, and from her mouth, roots, long, gnarled, twisted, like veins, spreading into the stone. The report was buried. The intern vanished 6 months later. No explanation, but he left behind a single photograph, found years later in a thrift store in Ohio. It showed the carving, and at the bottom, scribbled in pen, "She feeds it still. What is it? You'll find out soon." But first, you need to understand who Mother Catherine really was. Section 8. Mother Catherine was not born. She was appointed. No one could ever find records of her birth, baptism, or entry into the sisterhood. Her file at the diocese was barely a page. A few lines, no photo. Just a signature and a date from 1842. Yet by 1850, she held complete control over St. Mary's Convent. The other sisters obeyed her without hesitation. Not out of respect, but fear. She never raised her voice. She never struck anyone. But her presence alone could silence an entire room. And the smell of her office? Always the same. Iron and roses. Her room was off limits. Even the bishop was not allowed inside. But strange things happened when she spent time in there. The bells would toll unstruck. The candles would flicker, though there was no breeze. And the crucifix above the altar would tilt slightly to the left. Some believed she had once been part of an obscure French order, disbanded by the Vatican for ritualistic heresies. Others claimed she wasn't Catholic at all, that she had ties to a pre-Christian sect buried by time and fire. But the children who lived nearby didn't know that. To them, she was just the pale nun. She never came outside during daylight, only at dusk. She wore gloves year-round, and her rosary, it wasn't wood or silver like the others. It was jet black. The beads weren't smooth but rough, like tiny skulls. One girl swore she saw her levitate during evening prayer. Another, only 6 years old, refused to go near the convent again after the lady in black smiled at her from the gate and whispered something in a language no one could understand. Her mother said she woke up with claw marks on her back that night. And then came the consecration of silence. It was a new ritual introduced by Mother Catherine herself. Every Friday at 3 a.m., the sisters would gather in the crypt beneath the chapel. They were forbidden to speak. Instead, they hummed. One low, vibrating tone, held for 13 minutes. No outsiders were allowed. But one janitor, a war veteran who'd served in Mexico, hid in the rafters to listen. He lasted 3 minutes. He burst from the church screaming. His eardrums ruptured and clawed at his eyes. He said he saw a shape rise from the center of their circle, not a person, but a mass, a thing without bones. He died in a sanatorium, repeating only one phrase. She brought it with her, and now it won't leave. So who was Mother Catherine? A leader? A heretic? Or a vessel? Because according to one Vatican letter found decades later, marked eyes only, stamped with the red seal of the Inquisition, she wasn't just overseeing St. Mary's. She was protecting something buried beneath it. And one day she failed. That's when the disappearances began. Section 9. What Mother Catherine guarded was not merely a secret, but a darkness older than the church itself. A presence so insidious it had seeped into the very foundations of St. Mary's. Unseen, yet omnipresent. Late one night in 1857, a group of sisters, driven by desperation and whispers of the truth, attempted to confront the source of the evil beneath the convent. Led by Sister Mary Collins and Sister Teresa Donovan, they descended into the crypt, the air thick with decay and an almost electric charge of dread. There, in the flickering candlelight, they found the altar, the black obsidian slab etched with arcane symbols. Around it lay the remnants of twisted rituals, dried blood, shattered candles, and bones. But what truly froze their blood was the door, a heavy iron barrier engraved with sigils designed to imprison, not protect. Behind the door was silence, an abyss. As they peered through the narrow gap, a pulse vibrated from within, a heartbeat not their own, dark and slow, syncing with their rising terror. Whispers curled around them in voices not their own, chanting in languages long lost to human memory. Suddenly, a cold wind slammed the door shut. Panic exploded as they pounded against the iron, but it held firm, sealing them from the truth and from the light above. Days later, Mother Catherine was found at the chapel altar, eyes wide, vacant, lips trembling, her black rosary shattered at her feet. She whispered one phrase before collapse. The veil is torn. The hunger wakes. After that, the convent spiraled faster into decay. Nuns who remained either disappeared without trace or returned hollowed, broken. The institution itself seemed possessed, its very walls weeping dark moisture, the bell tolling at odd hours without a bell ringer. Church officials, upon hearing of the chaos, sent inquiries, but each was stonewalled, diverted, or buried deep in bureaucratic shadows. Letters from St. Mary's became rarer, each more cryptic and desperate than the last. And then silence. For over a century, the convent sat abandoned, whispered about in hushed legends by locals, an American relic of horror hidden in plain sight. But the story does not end there, because the darkness beneath St. Mary's was not confined to the past. It waits, waiting for the veil to tear again, waiting for the next to descend, waiting for you. Remember, true knowledge demands a price. You have glimpsed what others were never meant to see, and with this knowledge comes power and responsibility. Do you dare continue, or will you turn back, content to live in comfortable ignorance? If you want the full truth, write, "I am ready," twice below, because what follows will change everything you thought you knew about faith, power, and the shadows that govern us. Section 10. They say power corrupts, but real power is a virus. It infects, consumes, and spreads silently, transforming everything it touches. St. Mary's was no exception. It was a microcosm of a far darker truth. Institutions that cloak themselves in holiness often hide horrors far worse than any outsider imagines. Mother Catherine wielded power like a scalpel, precise, cold, and merciless. But what she was truly serving wasn't God. It was an ancient force, one older than Christianity, older than Rome itself. A force that demanded sacrifice not just of flesh, but of will. The disappearances weren't mistakes or accidents. They were carefully orchestrated purges designed to feed this force, to keep it alive beneath the convent. And the nuns? They were both prey and prison. Inside those walls, minds were broken down and rebuilt, reshaped into vessels of control. The penances, the fasting, the isolation, all tools of psychological warfare. A slow dismantling of identity, leaving only obedience. The local communities, wary at first, eventually accepted the convent's facade of charity. The orphanage, the infirmary, the prayers, all masks, tools to mask the rot beneath. Behind closed doors, the sisters lived in constant terror, caught between blind faith and creeping madness. Letters smuggled out, hidden in hymnals and embroidered hems, hinted at the truth. But no one was listening, or able to hear. And why would they? Because those who wield power don't want their secrets exposed. The church spent decades burying these stories, erasing records, silencing witnesses. The few brave enough to speak were labeled heretics, madwomen, or worse. But truth has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. In the decades that followed, a pattern emerged. Disappearances, strange deaths, unexplainable phenomena. Not just at St. Mary's, but in similar institutions across the country. The same shadow stretched far beyond Wisconsin. And now it's closer than you think. There are places, hidden in the folds of American society, where control isn't spiritual, but psychological. Where rituals aren't prayers, but programming. Where obedience is manufactured through fear, pain, and ancient symbols carved into the soul. What happened at St. Mary's wasn't an isolated horror. It was the tip of a dark iceberg, a reminder that the greatest monsters don't lurk outside walls. They dwell inside them. And once you see the pattern, you can never unsee it. Are you ready to look deeper? To confront the forces that shape not just history, but your mind? Comment, "I see the pattern" twice below to claim your place on this path. Because from here, the veil thins, and the truth claws out of the shadows. Section 11. The psychological chains forged at St. Mary's were not unlike those that bind men today. Silent, invisible, yet suffocatingly real. This was never just about nuns or convents. It was a blueprint for control, manipulation, and submission that transcended time and place. Consider the rigid schedules, the ritualistic prayers, the isolations, and public confessions, not just acts of devotion but carefully crafted methods of psychological dominance. Every punishment inflicted was a lesson in fear, every moment of silence a cage tightening around the mind. Mother Catherine was the architect of this system, a master of psychological warfare disguised as spiritual discipline. The sisters were stripped of their individuality, reduced to obedient vessels for a power far darker than any of them understood. What began as faith became a tool of tyranny. This wasn't unique to St. Mary's. Across history, institutions, religious, political, social, have used the same techniques to suppress dissent and enforce conformity. The illusion of choice, the fear of isolation, the internalized guilt, all are weapons in a war on the human will. In modern terms, this manifests in systemic psychological control, propaganda, surveillance, social conditioning, all designed to shape how you think, what you believe, and how you act. The convent may look different today, but the mechanisms remain unchanged. The question is, how much of your mind is truly your own? Understanding this is the first step toward breaking free. The echoes of St. Mary's resonate in the shadows of your own life, in the subtle pressures to conform, the whispered doubts planted by unseen forces, and the invisible chains wrapped around your choices. The veil between the past and present thins here, exposing the dark roots of institutional manipulation and the ancient corruption that feeds it. Only the awakened can see beyond the mask. Are you ready to pull back that mask? Right? I break the veil twice in the comments to claim your awakening and join those who refuse to be controlled. Because now the real story begins, the one they never wanted you to hear. Section 12. Behind the walls of St. Mary's and institutions like it, a sinister pact was made. A convergence of ancient corruption and modern power. This wasn't simply spiritual darkness, but a fusion of occult ritual and institutional machinery designed to harvest something far more valuable than souls: control itself. Mother Catherine was the linchpin, a living conduit between earthly authority and something far older, far more relentless. The black obsidian altar wasn't just stone. It was a gateway, a beacon calling something hungry, something ancient. What was summoned beneath the convent was never meant to be understood by the faithful. It was a force. It was a force that fed on obedience, growing stronger with every whispered prayer twisted into submission. It thrived in silence, in fear, in the breaking of wills. This corruption was not confined to the convent walls. It spread like a virus into the wider church, the governing bodies, even the very governments meant to protect the people. Behind polished facades, beneath the grandeur of cathedrals and halls of power, the same ancient machinery turns, manipulating, silencing, bending truth to fit an agenda. Look at the cover-ups, the disappearances, the unexplained tragedies. These are not accidents or coincidences. They are symptoms of a system that has traded transparency for control, compassion for domination. The darkness Mother Catherine ushered in still lingers, not just in dusty archives or abandoned convents, but in the very institutions shaping the world today. To confront this is to confront the greatest lie ever told, that submission brings salvation. But salvation comes only through awakening, only by stepping into the light, by questioning every authority, every doctrine, every narrative spoon-fed to the masses, can a man reclaim his power. The truth is dangerous, but ignorance is fatal. Are you prepared to see the world unfiltered? To break free from the chains woven by centuries of manipulation? Comment, I reclaim my mind, twice if you're ready to stand against the darkness and awaken to your true power. Because what follows will strip away every illusion you've been fed. Section 13. What if I told you the horrors of St. Mary's were just the surface? A symptom of a deeper rot entwined with elite power structures and secret societies operating beyond public sight. These groups have long exploited faith and fear, mastering psychological control to keep the masses compliant and blind to their manipulation. The convent was a microcosm, a testing ground for ancient techniques still wielded today by shadowy organizations who shape policy, economics, and culture with cold precision. Symbols like the Black Rosary, secret rituals, and coded language are not relics. They're tools, blueprints passed down for centuries to program obedience and suppress resistance. Think about it. Why do so many institutions insist on obedience without question? Why are certain truths buried, history rewritten, inconvenient voices silenced? Because control is the ultimate currency, and the dark legacy of places like St. Mary's proves it. But knowledge is power. The first step to breaking free is recognizing the patterns. Recognizing that the prison is not just physical but mental, crafted through generations of manipulation. It's the subtle erosion of will, the coercion of belief, and the destruction of identity. This is your awakening. You are not just a passive observer but a warrior at the front lines of a psychological war fought in shadows. The key is to reclaim your sovereignty, your mind, your beliefs, your freedom. The nuns who vanished didn't disappear by accident. They were casualties in this war for control. And the fight continues. This story is not just history, it's a warning and a call to action. Are you ready to fight back? To shatter the illusions and claim your true power? Right, I break the chains twice in the comments if you stand with those who refuse to be controlled. Because once you understand the depths of this corruption, there's no turning back. Section 14. As the layers peel back, you realize St. Mary's is more than a haunted relic. It's a mirror reflecting the darkest truths about power itself. Institutions don't just wield influence. They manufacture reality. They create narratives so convincing, so deeply embedded, that questioning them feels like betrayal. But beneath that polished surface lies coercion dressed as piety, manipulation masquerading as salvation, and fear sold as faith. The fate of those missing nuns is a testament to this cruel machinery. A chilling reminder that power, unchecked and cloaked in sanctity, devours everything in its path. The convent's walls echoed with more than prayers. They housed secrets designed to fracture souls and silence dissent. These tactics didn't end with the 19th century. They evolved. Modern psychological warfare borrows from these same dark playbooks. Control through surveillance, propaganda, and systemic fear. Yet, within this darkness, there is a spark, a call to awakening. The man who dares to look past the veil, who refuses to be pacified by easy answers or empty rituals, stands on the precipice of transformation. This is your moment. To understand the forbidden history of St. Mary's is to understand the forces that still bind society today. Knowledge here isn't just information, it's liberation. But liberation demands courage. The courage to face uncomfortable truths, to confront inherited lies, and to reclaim your sovereignty. If you are ready to walk this path, write, "I embrace the truth" twice in the comments. Because this knowledge is a double-edged sword. Once you wield it, there's no going back to ignorance. Section 15. Now, standing at the edge of this abyss, you must decide what kind of man you will be. Will you retreat into comfortable ignorance? Or will you step forward, armed with the forbidden knowledge few have ever dared to grasp? The story of the nuns who disappeared from St. Mary's is not just a dark chapter of history. It is a living warning. It exposes how ancient corruption, psychological control, and institutional manipulation are intertwined in a web designed to keep power concentrated, obedience unquestioned, and truth suppressed. You have been shown the machinery behind the mask, the rituals that bind, the silence that kills, and the shadows that shape entire generations. But knowing this is only the beginning. True mastery comes from using this knowledge to break your own chains, to see through illusions, and to reclaim your mind and spirit from those who would control you. Remember, every system built on fear is vulnerable to the courage of a single awakened man. Let this story be your call to rise. Take this knowledge, guard it, and use it wisely. You are no longer blind to the darkness behind the veil. You are the light piercing it. If you stand with those who refuse to be manipulated or silenced, declare it now, write, "I am the light" twice in the comments and commit to your awakening. Because this is not just history. This is your legacy. This is your power. This is your freedom. Closing statement. The shadows have spoken. The veil has been lifted. Now, the choice is yours. Remain a prisoner of the unseen forces that govern your world, or become the master of your own destiny. Truth is a weapon, and it is the greatest power you will ever wield. But power without action is meaningless. It is time to stand, to question, to break free. This knowledge is dangerous because it liberates. Use it, share it, protect it. You have been awakened. Now live like it. If this truth has stirred something inside you, if you are ready to join a brotherhood of seekers and warriors who refuse to be controlled, subscribe now. Hit the like button to fuel the light, and comment below with "I am the light" twice, to lock in your transformation and make your voice heard in this fight for freedom. The world needs men like you. The darkness fears you. Rise.